Wi-Fi Sheep would like to say a huge thank you to all of you that kindly support us. Help us continue to bring new videos like this. Join patreon.com/Wi-Fi Sheep from just $1 a month. Hello there and a very warm welcome back to youtube.com/Wi-Fi Sheep with me, Tom. Now, believe it or not, February the 28th, 2022 marked officially and apparently 10 years of the Raspberry Pi. Can you believe it? The Raspberry Pi is now officially over a decade old. This kind of means that it's falling into the categories of retro in its own right, especially if you count those early boards. And I have noticed that those early boards have gone from being the things that no one wanted to suddenly being classified as collector's items and retro. Anyway, I thought to celebrate 10 years of Raspberry Pi, something very, very important to me personally, and for, I suppose you could say, the creation of this channel, I thought we'd have a look back, and I've got some original Raspberry Pis, including some very early prototypes that I want to share with you right here on the channel. So here is my very first Raspberry Pi. It's a Raspberry Pi Model B. Proclaims to be made in the United Kingdom, and it was distributed by RS Components. And yeah, I've still got the box. It's a little bit battered, but I still have my box. Made in UK. And yeah, let's take a look inside. So I first got my Pi, I think it was summer of, I'm trying to think now, summer of 2014, so it's quite late. The Raspberry Pi had already been out since 2012, and I didn't get into it about 2 years later. And this was the very first Pi that was bought for me. And then literally months after I had this, they changed the form factor completely and released the Plus range of boards. So at the time it was annoying, but I suppose in hindsight it's probably good I did get an original. So yeah, this is the very first Raspberry Pi I ever owned. I still use it occasionally. It's a bit dusty, I have to be honest with you. I do use this occasionally, especially at the moment for a project. And the form factor on these original boards was quite different to what we're used to. Let me just turn that around so it's the correct way around. So you've got the Raspberry Pi 2011.12 and made in the UK stamp, CE mark. You can identify it as a later of the original boards because it has these two mount holes here and here, and also the connector is blue, not black, for the audio. These had a reduced GPIO header, so it was 28 pins on the GPIO. You had a separate RCA jack for video, and you had a separate proper headphone stereo jack, so it wasn't that combi jack that they use now. I think it was 10 base T. Was it 10 base T or 100 base T? I can't remember. The Ethernet connection was slow. And you had just two USB 1. Was it USB 2 or USB 1 on these? I can't remember, but it was slow. Also, on the other side, full-size SD cards. So we weren't using the mini standard at this point. And then we've got HDMI. The heat sinks here I've added, and I think most of us that have these original boards did add extra heat sinks because we were all trying to run Mario 64, because of course the first RetroPie gaming OS had come out, and that's pretty much what a lot of us jumped straight onto. And of course these things were just not powerful enough to run N64 stuff well at all, so you had to overclock them. The standard clock rate was 700 megahertz. And if you put heat sinks on, you could get it up to sort of 900, 1,000 plus, but you kind of fried the board at that point. So, just for comparison, I'll show you. This is a Raspberry Pi 4 Plus. This is the most recent, up-to-date one at time recording, and you can actually see if I put the two together. Let's just take it off its packet. Put the two together, you can see how, although the size is roughly the same, the actual form factor has changed quite significantly. Also, you can notice how the use of much larger, and in some cases surface mount or even through-hole components, which by the time we get to the more recent Raspberry Pi 4 Plus, we're down to some very small components that are all, machine surface mount, as opposed to being much more bulkier on the earlier board. And there's only 10 years difference between this and this, so it's quite astonishing just how, even in the domestic field, how technology has moved on during that time. Anyway, it's not this particular board I want to show you, because I'm sure you probably already own one of these, or you've certainly seen these. So let's pop that just to a side for a minute, and I want to show you something I've got hold of more recently. First of all, we'll start with this, which is from a different supplier. This is Element 14. This is an early Raspberry Pi Model A. Now, I got these quite recently off eBay, and the reason I bought them is because I've never actually owned the original Model A, and they don't make these anymore. And I knew I had this video coming up, so let me show you this. This has probably never been used, new old stock. And this is one of the later revision Model A boards, which had half the memory. So the Model A had 256 megabytes on its 700 megahertz single core Broadcom chip, and the Model B was 512. And also the Model B obviously had the Ethernet, it had the double USB, whereas obviously the Model A just had the single USB, the Ethernet was taken off, and also things like the Ethernet network driver chip is unpopulated. And basically they cut the board down just by not populating things. Obviously on my version I've dumped a load of self-adhesive heat sinks on stuff, but this one has never actually been faffed around with. So, and it just occurred to me that these things could actually get quite collectible, being first generation Raspberry Pis and an important machine at that, especially the early, production ones, or even the pre-production ones. So I thought an opportunity to get hold of a board now, while they're relatively cheap, people don't want them because they might get quite collectible in the future, and it's a nice thing to have. So let's just pop that one to the side, because I also bought roughly around the same time, different seller, another Element 14 box. Now these do state made in the UK. I'm going to show you this. This possibly is either one of the very last Chinese made ones, or it's one of the very first British made ones. So this is another Raspberry Pi Model B, and this is a particularly early one. So if I compare it with the later production Model B, you'll see there's already a fair few differences, such as the colour of the phono jack. We have header installed here that we don't have any headers here. And just generally speaking, the components are slightly different and the markings are different. So this one does have the CE mark, FCC mark underneath, but it's not labelled as made in the UK at all. So this might actually be a Chinese made board. There are differences over the others. Also, if you notice the main processor, I'm zooming to show you that, so you can get it on the light. You notice it actually says Samsung, as in the Korean electronics manufacturer. That's because the chips used for these, the ARM Cortex processors, which were used for these, were actually straight out of set-top boxes. So they were used for, if you had like cable or digital satellite or something like that, and you had, at the time you had the set-top box that used to convert your signal into something your television could understand and show. These were the chips that actually powered those digital devices. And they're not the most powerful thing in the world, but they are very good as a video chip, and they were just powerful enough to be able to run a Linux kernel, hence why they got used as the basis for the Raspberry Pi. While we've got these early generation Pis out, let me just show you a couple of accessories that started to come out around the time for the original form factor board. All these accessories are now absolutely useless because obviously the form factor then changed with the Plus range that came out around 2014. But here is an official Element 14 gory pink plastic case. So there wasn't a case for these, you just given this circuit board. So a lot of people, myself included at the time, wanted to actually fit these into cases. This is one I think I picked up spare or scrap at a Pi Jam, still sealed, element 14, just because it is an original case. Not an official case, but an original case designed for the Raspberry Pi. And then I'll show you this from the UK. MacLeod Electronics, which was a bit like Tandy Radio Shack in the States, and they went bust a few years ago, didn't survive the financial crash of the sort of early 2010s. This was, I think they were giving these packets away at one of the Raspberry Pi Jams I attended, because this is an official breakout board kit which they did for the original Pi that wasn't directly compatible with the later revision boards. So these all lost value quite quickly. Basically it's just a ribbon cable and some GPIO pins and a header that allowed you to make a little breakout board. You can see here some assembly required for your GPIO for your original Raspberry Pi. So I've still got that in its sealed bag. Yeah, I'm beginning to get a bit nerdy and collect things, but considering MacLeod have now gone and the product this is for is now defunct as well, getting stuff that's still sealed, yeah, it's going to get a little more tricky unless loads of people have stockpiled this stuff and are just waiting to offload it. I don't know, but still, I kind of like having this stuff in my collection. So what I thought we might have a go at doing is having a look at the very first Raspberry Pi Linux distribution that ever came out for the original Raspberry Pi board. Now, believe it or not, you can still get hold of these from an official source. There's a website, downloads.raspberrypi.org, I think it is, and they actually still have available all the released previous versions of Raspbian, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to flash up a brand new card to run on these original Pis. Now, because most of the Pis I use are not these, I only have unused mini, these are 16 gig micro SD cards. So what we'll use is an adapter, which I'll need anyway to flash when I put this into the Mac. So there's an adapter, so we'll put the micro card into the adapter, and then the adapter will fit into the Pi like so, and we can then try out here on the channel an original Raspbian Raspberry Pi Linux operating system from back in 2012. So if we go to downloads.raspberrypi.org/Raspbian/images, you should see a list like this of all the previous images dating until the 2nd 2020. Sorry. We want to come all the way back up the top here to the 16th of the 7th 2012, which would have been, according to this, the first official release of Raspbian. This was a Wheezy Raspbian Debian Linux build, so we'll click, it was a parent directory. Now we got these .zip, so I want to save link as. I'll just dump that on my desktop for the minute. So this image is coming in at 440 megabytes. The original images were very, very small for Pi because SD cards were expensive. Not many of us are even using the SD card format at this time. I was still on compact flash cards or cassette tape, so be it digital cassette tape. So this was all brand new at the time. So we've got this zip file. Let's just unzip that. And we have an image file. So let's go to applications and we'll get Belina Etcher. Select our image. Our source, which is our Apple SD, and we'll just click to flash. And we'll come back when that's done. So we're nearly ready. We're going to try this very early Model B, 2011 Model B. I've just put in a mouse. I'm going to put a USB keyboard in. This now ties up both USB ports of the device, so that's that done. Here's the SD card now flashed. We'll keep it in the adapter because this takes full-size SD cards. in that goes. And then just HDMI. And I have a cable here that's attached to a capture card, so you should be able to see directly what comes out if this works. So that goes in there. You'll notice now how we've got sort of bits coming out of this Pi at all different angles. If I can even stop it moving around on the desk, which was another common problem. You start putting lots of cables in, trying to keep the thing from moving around. So finally, we need to put a power supply in. Now originally you had to grab anything you could that worked, and they said, oh, we'll use a phone supply. Most phone supplies were under an amp, which actually wasn't enough power, so undervolting with Raspberry Pi was a huge issue. I have here, this is an official Raspberry Pi free power supply. They didn't make any kind of official supply or official case originally, but this will work fine, and it gives us a nice 2 amp or 2 point something amp feed, which would be more than enough. Remember, these do not have Bluetooth, they do not have Wi-Fi. They're a very simple early device. Right, I think we're done. So let's turn on and let's see what happens. Rainbow boot screen, which is a good sign. And we're there into the login. Now, if I remember correctly, the default login, which because you have to log in manually every time, was Pi, and it was Raspberry was the password. And of course, no one bothered to change that, so it became a major security risk with Raspberry Pis getting hijacked and all sorts. And now, if we want to start the graphical user environment, we can say start X, and that should load us into the original Raspberry Pi environment. And there it is. I have to say, this is loading surprisingly quickly and surprisingly well. My aspect ratio is a little bit strange because there's quite thick borders going on, but hey, it's there and it's working. That's loading really fast. So this is the, I think it's the Alex ED, the desktop environment. Let's just do a quick check. Alex DE, yes. So this is a lightweight desktop. This is before they had Pixel, their own build going on. This is what they use. So it's very much Windows-esque. So desktop, mouse, Pi background image thingy. A sort of monitor here told you what was going on, time if it was correct, which it isn't, lock screen, log out, and then you had obviously things like programming, internet, quite a few web browsers on here, including things like NetSurf, which is a surprise. Just check out NetSurf quickly. Or if you try and load something, you see the it does load quick though. The activity monitor shoots up in the corner. And there's NetSurf. Obviously, we're not connected to the internet at the minute. You've then got things like Scratch. Let's try Scratch. Gosh, that loaded quite quick. So Scratch was, at the time, billed as the sort of the entry level to coding. Even I played with it for a little bit. So it's Scratch for kind of beginners. And then for slightly more advanced beginners, we were meant to have Python, which we're moving on to. So we don't save that. So we've got Python 2 and 3 on there. I don't remember Python 3 being so early. I thought it was Python 2 originally. But the original IDEL environments, or idle environments. See, that'll open up. It will. There we go. New window. So what you could do is you could type your Python in here, and then you could actually run it, and it'd run it here in the shell for you. And that was kind of how it was meant to work. We've got some Python games preloaded. There wasn't an awful lot preloaded on here actually. We'll leave as is. So we'll say OK. Wormy snake-like game. What's that do? Yeah, so these sort of games were the things done with Pygame and Python 2, and this was the kind of software. Let's press the key. Oh, blimey, we're off. This was the kind of stuff we were meant to be coding and creating using Raspberry Pi. Very much sort of modern BBC Micro-esque type programs, which was the original aim of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. And in a kind of sad way, it didn't really happen, because not many kids or young people actually made new games for the system, which, you know, I think was a shame. I know what they were trying to do, but it just didn't happen. So didn't get that many Pygame Python type release. Pygame or Python type releases for the Pi. And of course, all this stuff wasn't unique to the Raspberry Pi. It could be used on other platforms. So it wasn't like BBC Micro games being kind of unique to the BBC Micro. Let's just see if we can close that. What's one thing I wanted to try? Now, obviously, we have no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth on this, but I do have my hardwire Ethernet connection. So let's just pop that in. There we go. That'll put us online. And let's just go back to internet. And there's this Dillo, which was an early web browser. And let's go home. Continue. When was this last updated? 2015. So we're going to try some internet. So let's see what happens with the Wi-Fi Sheep website. I expect terrible things, but let's have a go. Wi-Fi sheep.co.uk. No, we're not happy. Let's just try I can never pronounce this, was it? Mardi? Forgetting how on earth you pronounce this. I can't pronounce it. Never mind. Just scream a bit at, at your computer screens or your phone screens, however you're watching me, and tell me what it is. Let's try this. Okay, sort of works. Well, actually, it doesn't work too bad, that. And a lot of the... yeah, that's not bad. There's anything going on in events at the moment as I record this. Nope, I think we finished the season. Yeah, we finished last year with a Pi Jam that got cancelled, so yeah. But to be fair, that's actually running surprisingly well. This is the first ever Raspberry Pi operating system, Linux operating system, running on one of the very early first ever production Raspberry Pis, and it's actually not a bad experience, which is a real surprise. I honestly thought this was going to be horrid, but it really isn't. And you start to ask questions about how bloated Raspbian has got, or sorry, Raspberry Pi OS as it is now, how bloated it's got that, we're just running at stock 700 megahertz as well. So it's surprising actually how well this runs. Let's try shutting down, because there isn't a shutdown option. So all you can do is log out, and it dumps you straight back at the prompt. So the only way we're going to get out of this alive is we'll have to tell the machine to manually shut down, which is sudo shutdown -h now, and that will start to close the system down. If you just pull the plug, it's very easy to corrupt the SD card with Linux. And there we go. It is now successfully shut down. So can you believe it? There we go. 10 years of the Raspberry Pi and those first generation 2011, 2012 boards now falling into the realms of retro collector's items. I also can't believe just how fast the original Raspbian operating system actually ran. I always remember the OS being horribly slow, and yet you saw it for yourself. It was running really fast on those original prototype or early generation production boards. Anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed this nostalgic look back at Pi. I am feeling so old right now. I don't know about you. If you have done so, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter. It's at Wi-Fi Sheep. That's at Wi-Fi Sheep on Twitter. And if you're feeling particularly generous and would like access to additional content and some recent blog features I'm doing, you can join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Wi-Fi Sheep. As always, thank you so much for your company, and I hope to see you real soon right here on the channel. Until next time, bye for now.